Since 2020, conventional obstetrics and even natural birthing world practitioners have been captured by so much medical tyranny. And yet, at the same time, the way our babies are brought into the world is the most impactful for their overall well being in the short and the long term. For over 13 years, I have been able to clinically measure the impact of birth trauma on our children, and never has it been more of a risk to move through the birthing systems without full consciousness and ownership. Young parents have always asked me about childhood shots for their kids, and we have always been committed to informed consent. Very quickly into 2020, an immediate new question parents would ask in the office was, what about home birth? The demand for a more aligned and conscious birth is greater than ever, and there's significant shortages in aligned providers in our communities, especially birth doulas. The world is waiting for women like you to do the brave and honorable work of holding space for the greatest rite of passage in a woman's life, conceiving and becoming a mother. This is your opportunity. If you're wondering whether doulaship is your path to purpose, with a generous dash of abundance and sustainable success, my good friend and colleague Ayla Cuenca's Uncovering Birth Doula training starts May 15th. Click the link in our show notes for more information on her masterclass, open house Q&A, and this amazing training. Let's save our communities by saving our moms and babies through an empowered birthing experience. Welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and this episode is with the one and only Landon Starbuck, creator of the War on Children documentary, one of the most powerful films that I believe I have watched easily in the last 5 to 10 years, but especially like 50 million views, zero marketing, completely grassroots, banned, like literally, like their reach completely pulled, largely like every bit of censorship against them, and a reach that is inspiring so many. One, to recognize the evil that exists out there. But what Landon shared in this episode was a very clear philosophical premise, faith-based approach, and then at the same time, just what I would consider just exactly how the systems and the bodies heal is doing the work to truly understand that you have to heal within, that you have to heal and nourish your families from within. And when you optimize your family's own resiliency and their own strength of mind, heart, and spirit, that in the end, what happens is we start to find our community, and through that community, we begin to heal and change the world. I am so grateful for this opportunity to share with Landon, and at the same time, I would say a short interview, a very effective, a very powerful interview, and this family, the Starbucks, one of those that have fled California, found themselves in Tennessee, and recognizing that the opposition and the evil and the darkness was still very present. And they did the thing that what seems like they know how to do best, is they stood up to it and they took a stand, and they are making waves. The War on Children documentary, I watched it on Rumble. It's well worth the price of admission, and watch it, share it, and I promise you, you will be very, 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 very attuned to not just the opposition, but the hope, faith, and possibility for our future. Love and appreciate you all. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Future Generations podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to resolve, do better now, and for our future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. I have with me a very special guest. The Starbuck family is a family I've been following for what is crazy to say years now. Like, I wish it wasn't like years that this thing has been going on. And the recent release of your film, The War on Children, I believe, Landon, is a landmark film. I love what you guys did. I devoured it, and I have a ton of questions. However, I love how you balanced so many things. One, the war, but I love so much of the story that you guys had just about your family, about your own journey. You really personalized it really well, and I wanted to welcome you to the show. I hope you could introduce yourself so our audience gets to know you both personally and professionally.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So I'm a mom of 3, and I left Hollywood as a billboard charting artist to fight trafficking. And I really didn't know a lot about child trafficking or exploitation. I just knew the exploitation I saw when I was in that industry and wanted to do something about it. So I served in different capacities until I really realized that, you can't put buckets of water out on a fire if there's trails of gasoline leading up to it. Wow. And that message is in my band TEDx talk. But I realized I was spending a lot of time. I started my own nonprofit called Freedom Forever, where we fight child exploitation every day. And I realized most of my work is spent just convincing people that this is actually happening and how it's happening. And I realized, my husband, who's an award-winning film director as well, and he also left Hollywood. We realized if we combined our talents and efforts, that we could make, a documentary that really showed people the total problem from different aspects of the war on children. And so we set out to make this film, and we really didn't know what was going to come of it. And it's been amazing because we haven't spent $1 on any ads, mostly because we're banned from any ads on any social media platforms. But it's over 50 million downloads. That's of amazing. Normal families like yours and mine that care about kids, care about the future generation and saving them. So it's been a really amazing journey to have this film put out.
It's my 13th year of practice, the 4th year of the podcast. And we're called Future Generations largely because we've been so abreast to the war from a healthcare perspective, like more than anything. Everything that I I saw it, I predicted it as soon as all the things started to go down. I knew there was going to be a vaccine. I knew there was going to be passports. I knew there was going to be segregation. What I didn't know is what you guys have highlighted, and this is your expertise. This is the main driver of you guys to leave essentially the state and the industry. And I would love for you to, because I would say our audience is versed, but maybe with the gravity of your background and your expertise, could you just give us a level playing field of like what we are seeing, from especially a trafficking, especially from the transgender movement, et cetera?
Right. So, there's never been a greater demand ever in our history to exploit children and to normalize that exploitation, which is manifesting in a myriad of different ways. 10 years ago, we never thought they would force mask us and force vax and people would be narking on their neighbors. We also never thought there'd be drag shows for children. We never thought that children be sexualized in Netflix shows, or that children would have essentially like an OnlyFans type of accounts on Instagram, and Instagram would do nothing to stop it or tear it down. That big tech would essentially enable pedophiles. We didn't know any of this was going to happen. And now that it has, we have questions to ask of how did the culture allow this to happen? And we talk about this in our film, The War on Children, the mere exposure effect, a psychological phenomenon that is basically the more you expose somebody to an idea, the more they are likely to prefer it. Wow. So whether they are morally opposed to the idea or not, or to the product or not, the more they see it, the more it's in their consciousness, the more flags we see, the more virtue signaling we see, the more influencer type people and celebrities we hear talking about it, normalizing it, and showing it to us, that becomes our brain sense of normal. And so Hollywood really, pioneered this psychological phenomenon and made it so that we accept children being sexualized, children, talking about all sorts of, explicit adult topics that they shouldn't be, and in adult spaces that they shouldn't be. So there's this this line that was crossed at some point. Nobody knows exactly how or when it got crossed, but now we're living in a society, like I said, we're the greatest demand ever to exploit children. And it's because our culture not only has it become normalized, but it's allowed, it's tolerated by the law in some cases. So that's really, the overview of how we got here and how it was allowed to become normal.
I'm still in California. I'm in North County, San Diego. I would argue that we are in a pocket of California that has just done such a good job overall in terms of navigating all of these things. We have several activists working to fight against the government, but that's essentially what has happened over the last, couple years, where it's just like, if you don't affirm your children, then you don't keep your kids. And it's laughable, but at the same time, when it's juxtaposed with what you're saying, right? Drag shows and you see children. That was one of the most wild moments of your movie, where you're interviewing a drag like legend, and they won't admit that it's like exploiting children. And there's like footage. You're showing the footage in real time. Is it simply that exposure, and then therefore over and over and over, that the public, I guess, one is like, yes, this person's in the industry and this person is obviously just totally bought in, but the public and the parents bringing their children to these environments is gnarly to me.
Right. Well, it's such a good point that you brought up, because it's not just the introduction of these ideas. If there's nothing to counter bad ideas or bad values or bad morals, then the mere exposure effect is actually that much more palatable and effective. Wow. And that's why we have so many brainwashed people that seem to have brainworms that will believe anything that they hear in the mainstream media or that a celebrity sells them or tells them about. They lack that critical thinking skills. And so the absence of morality is really, I think, the most, pivotal part of all of this. Is not just if you're religious or not, but this idea that there's not moral relativism. We were sold this idea that, you do you, boo. Oh, this doesn't hurt you, then it's fine. And eventually those lines get crossed, because if there's no foundation of morality that we share, there's hostility, there's violence, there's children having double mastectomies at 13 years old and nobody's saying anything because nobody wants to offend anyone, because the culture now made the main value tolerance instead of righteousness and doing what is right. And, like I said, 10 years ago, that would have been crazy that we're sitting here talking about a 13-year-old having a double mastectomy because they are experiencing gender dysphoria, which has been around forever. And instead of getting the treatment, they're cutting off healthy girls' breasts. It's insane. Nobody would have agreed to that, but that was normalized, suggested, and there was no counter foundation of morality to push up against that and say, whoa, this is wrong. We're not doing this. And there weren't enough good people. That's really what I'm trying to say here, is the absence of good people. It wasn't just the prevalence of evil, it was the absence of good people standing up.
What do you believe is the formula that led you and your husband to essentially take that stand? Because I would agree with you. I would agree with you that there's so many good people without spines, like without, they have voices, they're just not using them, right. What would you say was the main catalyst for you guys?
Well, and I'll answer that, but you bring up a really great point again, is what's the point of being a good person if you're afraid to be who you are, to live authentically, to stand up for your values? Might as well go to the other side. Might as well be hedonistic and just nihilistic and do whatever you want to pleasure yourself and not stand for anything. There's no point of standing for values and morals if you are not going to stand up in front of everyone and be who you are in private, in public, whoever you are. That's the foundation of integrity, to be who you are no matter what environment you're around. So for my husband and I, when we made the decision to leave California and pretty much light our careers on fire and start over, it was a spiritual awakening for us. It was a realization that maybe the gifts that God gave us, in a creative capacity, weren't being used to the extent that they were needed at this particular moment of time. We felt this pull. We didn't really know what it was. We just felt like we needed to listen to that. And so we moved our family to Tennessee, And we thought, well, while we're figuring all this out, we'll have some sweet tea on our porch in Tennessee, and we don't have to worry about these, horrible communist policies coming down the pipeline like California. But that couldn't have been further from the truth.
Right.
The only thing was the people here had not really fully realized that these things were coming and actually were already embedded in here. And so we had a lot of work to do. And that's really what, set us into this fiery activism, space in our lives, where we realized that it wasn't just about policy or, anything superficial. It was about the next generation. It's about our children. We couldn't look at our children and know that we didn't say anything or do anything with the gifts that we have, with the means that we have, and with the knowledge and intuitive, realization that things were going to get really bad. And my husband has that unique perspective coming, from Cuba. His family survived communism in Cuba. So he could see this shift in policy, the shift in culture that underpin these giant leaps into, the unthinkable in America that's not happened up until now. And, me just being more of an intuitive, female, I could see these things like from day one, the masks, I said, they're not coming off. This is not just about safety. These don't work. They're not coming off. These are staying on. And I had that same sense, and to fight it, that it was wrong to put especially on children, the forced masking, the forced vaccine. So we started there. We actually started, ironically, in the medical freedom movement. And it just expanded from there, of this war on families and children. And it just became much bigger. And that's when all the dots started to connect for us.
There was I was interviewed recently on a chiropractic podcast, and admittedly an amazing, fast growing podcast. And the interviewer is from the Northwest the Midwest. And she was just asking questions innocently, because she's conservative and she's from the Midwest. It wasn't really. And she was like, why are you so active? And what do you see as trends? And I said, well, a lot of the people from the health freedom, medical freedom movement have actually moved into school boards and have moved into activism in school curriculums. And then we just all of a sudden ended up talking about transgender. And I didn't know that was going to come out of me, but it is so impossible to ignore. It's impossible to ignore, because I recognized with the entire transhumanistic movement with the vaccine, there's like, oh my God, like they are literally trying to stop family trees from being able to move forward, right? Miscarriages, all sorts of issues with fertility, all the shedding. And then I interviewed Nicole Pearson, an amazing lawyer out here in California. And we just started to go down this path of the same conversation. I was like, whoa, this is just naturally coming out of us. And then the cathartic moment was, whoa, like with each one of these patients, children, transitioned, surgeries, puberty blockers, irreversible, like literally irreversible, that a family tree is moving down and hopefully procreating on the planet, hopefully high value, high, moral human beings, hopefully, right? Logically, we would know that that's not necessarily the case, but immediately, like an immediate stop to that family tree's progression. And then, are you guys really, there's What is a Woman? There's you guys, right? There aren't that many films right now that are coming out to actually highlight this industry, essentially. The desire to go off grid and disconnect from the system was one of the single most important initiatives any household could have. Whether it is growing our own food, becoming sovereign in our energy production and usage, establishing alternative communication strategies, or digging a well and finding the infinity of primary water. About a year and a half ago, our family moved into our new home in North County, San Diego, on 3 acres of precious land here in America's finest county. One of the first things we did was hire Food Forest Abundance to design a regenerative layout for our land. From the different trees to plant differing berry guilds and synergistic pollinators, to consulting on alternative energy, collecting our rainwater, and even helping us find our local well guy, Food Forest Abundance and their Freedom Farm Academy has been pivotal in the gradual and consistent evolution of our household towards true sovereignty from the system. They have helped us simplify a very confusing process and helped us create the design of our dreams. It doesn't matter if you have 3 acres, dozens or hundreds, or just a small yard. Food Forest Abundance has something to offer you and your family in your journey to move your entire household off-grid. Use the code TheFutureGen to work with the absolute best in the world, Food Forest Abundance, to create your own freedom farm and get off-grid at a discounted rate.
Right. And that's what was really important for us, is to not just focus on one aspect of, the medical aspect of what they're doing to kids, and but really every aspect, because they intersect. Some people think the sexualization of children is separate from the transing of kids, and they're actually very deeply connected. And it's, it's very deeply rooted too. When you're fixing even a child's undeveloped sexuality by removing their genitals or mutilating them somehow, whether it's chemically or surgically, you are fixing and, potentially destroying their future sexuality. So a lot of people will say, well, I'm against the surgeries, even though they don't think it's happening. But, puberty blockers simply put a pause on puberty. But they don't understand that when you give a boy puberty blockers, their penis stops growing. And so you are effectively sterilizing and, neutering this child who has not had a, chance to even develop their body, their sexuality, their identity, and they're fixing it. So this is really about an adult's agenda and control over a fixed outcome for a child that is still developing and doesn't have that full realization or growth. And so when I talk to people like that, they're like, well, I didn't know. These experts and doctors from the American Academy of Pediatrics say that it just puts a pause on puberty. Well, that's the problem, is that they don't know. Even some of those doctors, they regurgitate what they're told, and you're not allowed to ask questions. And if you are, you're a transphobe, and all the other names they want to call you. But it's really evil when you peel back the actual facts of what these drugs are doing to kids.
It was about 3 or 4 months ago that I had a mom bring her daughter into my practice for advanced development. She's 8 years old. She started her cycle, and the mom. This is all things I hear. Like, I've taken care of kids in our community for over a decade, so I've seen a lot of different trends. I've seen a lot of, you hear things that are happening in the medical system. I'm not in the medical system. Like, we stay completely outside of the system, and I think that she's going to tell me that they're going to recommend birth control, because that's always the thing that they recommend. And as I kind of start to, which I don't usually do, but as I kind of get on autopilot, I start to fill in the blanks of birth control. And she goes, no. They recommended puberty blockers. And like, I paused, my jaw dropped. And I just asked, I was like, do you want more information about what that means? And she goes, I think I know what that means, but tell me, and then we just go into like chemical castration. We go into sexual offenders, and we go into these like very, obviously polarizing, but not very, they're very black and white, in terms of what we're doing to our children. And this mom's like heart just sunk, because this is her 3rd child. They've been with this doctor for three children. Each of her children have challenges with different things that have been pharmaceutically treated, and she's trying to get them out of the system. And she honestly was like, I knew it. Like, I knew that that's what they were recommending, but I couldn't like grasp it. Like, it's handed out like standard of care reflexively. And like you're saying, it's the gravity of that one recommendation for a mom that isn't looking for other options is crazy.
Right. And they're just not given informed consent. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And you're not allowed to ask questions. So I always tell people, if you can't ask questions, that's a red flag for sexual, offenders, for manipulators, for deceivers. Like, that's the number one litmus test.
For those who, I would imagine our listeners, because I've been talking about, have heard of the war on children, most likely have already started to watch it. What would you say is something that may be missed, whether it's a theme, whether it's a significant part of the movie? what would you say is something that would be, as the creator, something that we should pay close attention to?
Well, there's a couple of topics I would have loved to, go deeper into had we had more time. But I honestly think it was a feat to get people to watch this long of a film in its entirety already. So that was the hardest part about making the film, was editing it down without compromising the integrity of the stories. Right. But the two issues would definitely be the medical exploitation, the health ramifications from everything from the atrazine to the pesticides, the phthalates, to all of these chemicals and bioweapons that are being deployed against innocent, unsuspecting families by just grabbing, food at the grocery store. Right. I don't think there's an informed consent over what's being done. And now there's talks about, vaccinating lettuce and tomatoes without our consent. So, I mean, This is a topic, I think, and we're going to make future documentaries as well, that we really need to delve into to examine all of the effects of these, man-made, synthetic materials on growing, developing bodies and hormones and sexual outcomes and, fertility, all of that. And the other thing is, the family court system. That's another aspect of this that people don't really understand, that the court system itself is not a criminal system. It's not like you don't get a trial, you don't get a jury, you don't really have that many rights. And so children, that's why we see so many children, trafficked and sexually abused and exploited in the foster care system. So basically we have this system now that is allowed to steal children if parents refuse to lie to their child and to subscribe to the religion of this, transitioning industry. And that's really dangerous, because not only are those kids at more risk of being abused, exploited, but the fact that the families are being separated at a political scale. I mean, by our own government, right. A systemic scale. That is really a scary thing. And if we don't really, get our claws into that and figure out why that's happening, what policies are allowing that to happen, and reform that system, it's going to be it's going to be a weapon of mass destruction for our entire country, for the states that are participating and allowing that, that industry to take over families. Just even based on that one supposition that you're not affirming your child and lying to them about, not using their pronouns. So those are two aspects I think are the most dangerous things that we need to dive deeper into.
It's, I would say, one of my biggest queries and studies right now is figuring out the path for families like ours, though we wouldn't put ourselves in these types of situations, to protect our kids, to protect our relationship between, parent and child, mother and child, father and child. It's crazy that when you peel back the curtain, there, like something as simple as CPS in hospitals or law enforcement in hospitals, actually not there for you, they're there for CPS, right? And most people are like, what? Like, that's not true. And then you start to recognize that that's why you're like, I don't want to give my child that just cut themselves a tetanus shot, right? But that decision alone, like I just heard on my dad's group yesterday, is a real thing. And now it's leveraging so much more than just medical products and things like that. So I share that with you like 100%. I would love to know, maybe I didn't know I was going to ask you this, but you said it. I'm curious about what you saw in Tennessee. Like, what did you see in Tennessee that was maybe that stark of a contrast to what you expected versus California? Because I think I have a similar experience as well.
Right. Well, we had already been in a woke school in California and thought we were leaving that whole ideology. Mm-hmm. And, when we saw there was a DEI officer, at the kids' school, we're like, okay, I see where this is going. But when we're still at the stage where if you ask questions, they're saying, oh, well, this is just about, everybody feeling included, mm-hmm. And we're like, that we weren't getting straight answers on this stuff. So we had to, unfortunately, wait till something bad happens, until there's an incident where then they would deploy their racist agenda and policies. Wow. And to give you an example, my son was at a school and the teacher referred to him as Latinx. which is a political term to degenderize the Latin language. And my son, being part Cuban, said, no, I don't want to be Latinx. I'm not going to be called that. And so we, as parents, he wrote a letter and said, this is a political term. Actually, there's a lot of polls on this that say that Latinos do not want to be called this. And it's actually very insensitive and not culturally appropriate or responsive to the cultural values that we share as Latinos. So don't call them that. I mean, then there was a BLM sign put up, like all of these things started happening, and it's almost like they would see what they could get away with to see if any parents would push back. And there'd be a few squeaky parents, squeaky wheels, and mostly people would give up or not say anything. And that's really how we saw this, the SEL and the CRT injected into school systems. And then it was the sexually explicit books. And then it was the drag shows, which we exposed and documented day one that they were here. So it was really, you have to be so involved. I mean, and to document this stuff, to really show, legislators or city, commissioners or whoever it is that has the authority to do something about it, that there is a problem, because there's a lot of denial. And there's a lot of linguistic manipulation to offset the truth until you actually get into the nitty gritty of, no, this is what the policy looks like in action. So we saw these things coming, we warned about them, and then we responded, when we saw them actually happening.
How's the receptivity to your activism and to your, awareness building locally?
It's been really great. We have, it's kind of weird now because sometimes you don't know if people like you or hate you. So we have this very polarizing effect where people, could come up and give us a hug or even be in tears, like, thank you so much for what you're doing for our community. All of these things are, thank you for making the film, who share our values. And then sometimes we get these really creepy people that give us these death stares or try to take photos of us. So it's just, there's just weird things that happen like that. Yeah. But I mean, that just goes with the territory. It doesn't really bother us, and we're pretty much homebodies anyway. Yeah.
The last question I wanted to ask you is if you could verbalize your mission and what is like the deeper drive and inspiration behind the work that you have, and then also subsequently, what does the world look like when you are successful at that?
It's a great question. I mean, I'd say my day-to-day work is to defend children's innocence and strengthen families, because I really believe that is our future. And we're only going to be as strong as our families are, because it's the greatest resistance to evil, and it's the greatest threat to those who want to impart that evil and destroy the nuclear family. So those are things that I, on my day-to-day or my work is centered around. But ultimately, I do believe this is a spiritual battle. There is good and there is evil. And so to have faith in something greater than myself, and to not put the pressure on myself or any activist to solve all these problems, but instead try to awaken people and inspire them to become warriors themselves, is part of my mission. And Robbie's as well. So we try to equip others not to rely on us or one politician or anyone else to do the work for them, but to start from the inside of their home out. And if we do that, there's so much power that we have that we're actually not even using or deploying. And we no longer become dependent on big corporations or big pharma or big government or any of these things to dictate how we raise our children. We really do have power that we haven't even tapped into. So that's really, I feel very hopeful that if we do that, that not only will our children be protected, our families will be strengthened, but the government and whatever nefarious interests that seek to oppress or control us in our freedom and our spirit cannot thrive, if they're met with that level of strength from us. So that's what I would hope would come of that if families are truly strengthened and standing up.
I love that. I mean, it is a philosophical premise of chiropractic that the body heals from the inside out. And I've said for years now that if the body does, then so do families, and so do communities, and so do nations. And it's not treat the symptom, paint over the rust, shut off the fire alarm that's going off. It's literally like you owning yourself and owning your own authenticity, owning your values, but really leading and inspiring your children to do the same, and taking on the mission like you guys have is at the volume and veracity that you have has been inspiring to me. It's something that has just let me kind of see that there are beacons out in front of me to keep going and keep pushing, because in the end, anything that we don't step into and step up to, we obligate our children to do so in a much bigger way. And so I'm grateful for your time. I'm super, super inspired by the work that you do. And in the end, I applaud you for the 50 million views, because I know it's just, it's months old, right? Weeks old. It's not even like been a long time. Zero marketing. Congratulations. And in the end, like, you have made such an impact. I know in our community, especially at Future Generations, it's a huge buzz, and we're really grateful for you guys.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Well, I mean, the glory really goes to God, because to have 50 million people be reached with all the algorithms and suppression, like that's an act of God right there. But also it's a testament to the people that are waking up and paying attention and supporting films like ours, so that other people can hear about it and be exposed to this as well. So, thank you to your listeners and to everyone that cares about children and saving this next generation for standing up and standing in the gap.
As you probably know, I'm the clinic director of the Future Generations Clinic of Chiropractic. I wanted to invite those of you in the greater San Diego area to come check us out. We expect and experience miracles in our office every day, and would love for you to experience the same, as well as your family, especially your kids. This month, we're offering our new patient package for just $67 for podcast listeners. The offer retails at $349 and includes an in-depth consultation where our patients literally tell us we know more about their family's health in the first 15 minutes than virtually every doctor on their healthcare team combined. Our state-of-the-art clinical workup, including Insight nervous system scans, full spine digital x-rays, and a functional exam. We also include a full report of your results, a customized plan to realize your greatest health potential, as well as your first adjustment in our office. Check out the link in the show notes for all the details and claim the offer. Love and appreciate you all.